Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm quickly going to introduce myself. My name is Ninka. I'm the product manager for the financial statements. And with me today, I have Christian Stein that will present a little bit later on Probe. What we're going to cover today is firstly the welcome introduction. Then we're going to quickly look at Caseware working papers, then the IFRS and SME financial statements, then Probe, and then questions. I would like to ask as we go along, if there is any questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them also as we go along. And also the IFRS and SME financials, if we do get through that quicker, then the Probe will start a little bit earlier as they've got quite a lot to cover. So let's start to look at the beta process. We've got quite a few new clients joining us today for the first time in the beta process, and I thought it would be good just to go through that quickly. So firstly, the beta testing is an integral part for our development as it gives our clients the opportunity to provide feedback on content, but also to test the product in their environment. So therefore, the beta templates is not the final market versions, and therefore testing must always be done on a test data or non-live engagement. So either making a copy of a file or using dummy data, but not on live engagement files that you're currently working on. Then all of our templates in this release are on Caseware Working Papers 2022, and therefore you must install it to do the testing. Files will update when you open it, hence that you need to make a copy or have test data, and you cannot draw back to Caseware Working Papers 2021 once you've opened it. So if you have different people working in your team, also that all will have to be on Caseware Working Papers 2022 to open those files. After testing, you should uninstall Caseware Working Papers 2022 and the templates, and then you will reinstall the market versions that you download from the community until we release, and then you have access to the final market versions. Our beta timeline for this release is as follows. We have the webinar today, and then you have time to test from the 3rd to the 13th of October. And then you can provide feedback continuously. I'll go through the feedback form now, but final feedback we should receive on the 13th of October. But please, as you go along and you want to log, please log the different feedback that you have. I'm quickly just going to jump to the support side. So this is the support side that we upload all the different documents on, and also where the beta templates are. So here you see the SME and the IFRS template. You'll see all our release notes, and you also see the working papers. And here at the bottom, you'll see the beta feedback form. So this is the form, if you open it, that will, that you can complete for any of the issues that you have. Also, if you just want to provide general feedback, you can do that as well. So your email address, then you can just see a classifier for which area it is and basically give us the details there, and then you can submit it. You can submit as many feedback forms as you want as you go along. If you do not have access to this cloud site in this entity tab, we will provide you access during the course of today for everybody that is joining today. But if you do have access already, you can just go to this entity tab and you'll see all the documents there. If you've never used the support site before, you'll get a login detail to say, here's your password and here's the link. Please just make sure that it sometimes do go into your trash folder. So just double check if you don't receive it by the end of the day and don't have access. If not, just reach out to us by Monday and we will make sure that you do have access for that. Right, if we then look firstly at Caseware working papers quickly, there was two major feature enhancements. Firstly, the automatic documents, but they added the context selected to uncorrected misstatements typed documents in consolidated files, and the user can select the entity within the consolidation entity structure as context for the document. So you can make a document specific to a specific entity that's in your consolidation structure. Then there is some cloud integration features that they've added there as well, and there is some general fixes. I am going to refer a few times to the release notes because I do think it's quite vital that all the context is in there. So if you open the SME, IFRS release notes, all the Probe ones, you'll see all the context for the Caseware Working Papers beta. The key features are here, and then we also have some fixes that were done during this beta release. Then if we jumped into IFRS and the SME template. So there's a few things that we'd like to cover today, and the first one is the update process. So Christian will go into detail about the changes that we've made into the document manager for Probe and for 315, but those changes also affect the financials in two areas. Firstly, in our document manager, you'll see that the lead sheets all update to new document numbers, and you'll also see we've amended the folder for the financial statements a bit, and I'll show you that now. Then we've also worked quite hard on the data retention for the various updates. So when you do a file new from existing, all your input fields, that would say that the yellow cells that you've typed in will going forward retain. And then also on update, the only sections that should update is the sections that we have changed. So if you think about it for IFRS, I'm going to show you in a little bit, we've made some changes to the rights of use asset note. So if you had a rights of use asset note before, when you update it, it will stay the same because we've decided if you've tailored it, you will be able to copy it over rather than it change on the update. But if it is vital for compliance, for example, a tax note that had some tax changes, when you update that section should update. But that's the only sections that should update in your financials. And that's why it's quite important to go through your release notes to double check the areas that we've touched, because those will update in your files. But then if you, but all the rest of your customization should retain. This is quite vital for us to test because we've worked hard on the update process to make sure that the data does retain. So if you do have any feedback on this, especially on customized files, it would really be appreciated if you can get that to us. It's also just important to note that it depends from which from which file you update from. So if you're updating from a file that's maybe 2 years old, then all the updates from there will be affected in your file. So you'll have to go back to the previous release notes to see what we have amended in that and in this release notes, and then it will compound all the changes that will be in your file. In this release note, I've also included our May 2022 release, which was basically an XBRL release for some embedded images that I will quickly show you again. So if you haven't updated in June, that would be the change that come into your file, although it is not necessarily in this release specifically. So if we quickly look at a file, and I can just show you some of the changes. So firstly, if we look at an old file, this is our October 2021 file, you'll see the document manager, we have these documents here, and then we have our other folder here, and under the lead sheets, we also had a tax folder, which had some of our tax documents in them. If we then jump to the current folder after update, you'll see that these have updated. We've put some of our tax documents in here as it makes more sense. And we've also added the Cashflow worksheet here. This is very exciting. I'll talk about that shortly, but these are all your financial statement documents now all together in this folder. And then you'll have your tax schedules here at the bottom. Furthermore, you'll see that if you open your lead sheets, that these document numbers are all new and all the working papers in here for Probe are new. Because this is an ecosystem that work together, we also have to update the Probe documents even if we don't use it because the lead sheets are relevant to the financials. So what that means is if you do your update, and let's just quickly have a look at that. So if you go, sorry, my wrong file, the previous file, and you will either get a pop-up when you open your financials, or if you've clicked cancel, you can always just click on check for update. So again, this is something that you will do at the end of your engagement, and you won't do it when you're still busy with the engagement file to update to the latest template. And then you'll see in there, you'll have two options. I'm just waiting for it to open. It's got quite a few files open. There we go. So we have IFRS here at the top, and then we have Probe, and we have I've made a backup. So if I open the IFRS, you'll see here your new replaced financial statements, and you have the update financial statements. So we have the same in SME, and we recommend the update financial statements in any where you have no a very old file, or you have maybe a file that is broken. If you can rely on the previous year file, then this is the option that you will select, and that will only update the sections. But you'll see if you select that now, you and I've made a backup and I want to continue, you will get this warning message to say, but you have to update Probe as well. So it's not because you're a Probe user, it is just because, like I say, we've got shared documents. So you'll have to select Probe as well, and as soon as you select that, then you can update. Okay, if we then jump back to our slides. The first change that we've made in this release is cooperatives. So SIPC have mandated certain cooperatives to submit their IFRS reports from 1 October, extended to 2 January 2023 now, and we've included cooperatives as an entity type. Relevant notes and ACPs will also include pre-tag taxonomy. So what happened here is, like I said, originally it was 1 October, and the taxonomy changes for IFRS will still be effective from 1 October for companies, as it is every year. But the e-service portal from SIPC will own for co-ops are new, and that will only be available from 2nd of January. And that's why it will only be effective then. So what we have done is in the information store, you will have an option to select cooperatives, and then like normal, it will change your Companies Act, it will change your shareholders to members, and directors will stay directors. Then we've also added a few accounting policies, members' contribution, member reserve, and indivisible reserves, and then the relevant notes of that. So because this is quite a niche market, I would like to ask if you do have a cooperative and you do want to test it, that you do contact me. So please complete one of the forms and we can arrange a demo and we can go through it in more detail. So please reach out if you do have, as I know it is very entity specific. Then the cash flow statement and worksheets. So we have received feedback from the market, and if we say the market, from clients, from the regulators, from IRBA and from SAICA, regarding cash flows in general, and say that although the standard IS7 haven't changed at all, there is really a need for it to be re-looked at, because non-cash items is still on the face of the cash flow. So what we said is, let's re-look at it, and how can we improve on automation visibility on the workings of the cash flow. So there was a few thoughts that we had. I mean, we could make a period input, but that would really not be automated. So we said what would work really the best is if we have a cash flow worksheet, and the cash flow worksheet will basically be what you currently see in your cash flow. In each cell, there's a little formula. It will be that is split out. And then you will have the capability to input fields in there. So if you have a non-cash movement between trade payables and loans, for example, if there was a loan that was paid on behalf of somebody, or trade payables that was paid on behalf of somebody, then you can put it in the worksheet, and that will then update the cash flow. You'll have workings then, firstly, to support your cash flow. You'll have visibility on the non-cash items, and at the end of the day, your cash flow will be your non-cash elements. So your current year will work from your cash flow worksheet, and I'll show that to you now. Your prior year will be input. If the line items are the same, we will retain the figures from your previous year file. So if you run your update and you had tax paid, which is the same line, then the figure will be in there. If, however, we had added some lines, because we also looked at all the possibilities there were, for example, where we had a net line and perhaps it should have been split out, then that figure will obviously not pull through. But then on year end for the next year, it will. So that is how the cash flow work should work. And I'm quickly going to show you how that looks. Get that file open for us. Okay, right. So firstly, if you look here, our new document manager, the cash flow worksheet is here, the document that's here at the bottom. And then if I open that for us, you will see this is how it looks. I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger, just so that you can see it clearly. So we start at the top with the gray area, which is some guidance on how it works, because it is a big document that we are working on. And then if I go down, you'll see first we will have 3 sections. So the first section that I'll have is the balance sheet section. And basically what that is your open balance minus your closing balance, giving you your net cash in and outflow. If you then have anything that is mapped that will be through profit and loss, for example, if you had foreign exchange or something like that, that will automatically pull through. But you will also have, like I mentioned, the capability to put in figures here that it will automatically net off. So that is the first section of the cash flow worksheet. And then if I scroll down, you'll have your equity and liabilities, which works in exactly the same way. Where it is unlikely that you would have any non-cash elements, we have not inputted the yellow cells, just to provide some guidance on what is expected. If we then go down, you'll see at the bottom, you have always a check, the balance check, to make sure that it does come to zero, that your in and outs are balancing off the whole time. Then we have a second section, which is called the cash flow statement work paper, that again has some guidance at the top. And this is now your operating activities that first pull through. So again, this pulls through from your mapping, and what you will find here in the last column is what actually pulls through to your financials. So all these different lines automatically will update in your financials if you do make any changes. So we first have our operating section. And then we have our investing activities. So what happens here is, say, for example, in your PPE, you will have a purchase of property, plant and equipment. We default it always to the top one, and then you can reclassify it between the two lines. If we look here at intangible assets, so the movement was that, and then from your intangible asset note, the 100,000 pull through, which means the purchase is in the 679 and the proceeds was the 100,000. So if we quickly look at the intangible asset line, I'm just going to quickly jump to the financials. Oh, sorry, if this one there. So if I go to my intangible assets, you'll see that here I have my 100,000. If I then change this, so let's take my disposals to just 100 Rand, just to make it clear. And we update this figure to be the 579,763. And then I jump back to my cash flow. Then you'll see it updated there with 100 Rand, and there's my 579 and my 100. So it reads from the mapping and it reads from the note to your cash flow worksheet. And then if I go back to my cash flow, then you'll see here how the figures populate from the cash flow worksheet. There I have my intangible assets line. So all automated, all integrated, and giving you visibility on what you need to see. So if we then just go a little bit down, this section works exactly the same for all the areas. And then at the bottom, you'll also have a little test just to make double sure that everything comes to zero. So the cash flow worksheet is currently available in our SME template for beta testing. And it's really something that we would like feedback on from the users if it is working as expected. And also if any more guidance should be given on how to use it. You'll see that you'll have exactly the same for group as well. As soon as you switch group on, you'll have the same section for group. So you'll have a group cash flow worksheet and then a company one as well. Then what else did we do on the SME template? So like I mentioned, we've got the cash flow and then we've got the co-op changes. Then next that we've done is the tax changes, which I will show to you now. And then we've made some general feedback changes. If you firstly look at the tax changes, just up here, but sorry, but. So if we go to our tax changes, because the tax rate changed, we had to do some changes, but a lot of the disclosure was already in there. So remember your tax rate, your 28% pulls from your information store for your tax expense. So if you do need to change it, you can just go and change it there. Then in your deferred tax, we've added here at the bottom this change in tax rate, which is basically just some narration on the change that has been made. If we jump to our current tax, we also use the opportunity to make sure that the all the other tax notes are still allowed. And one of the changes we've made here is we took out the STC as that's not relevant anymore and changed it to be other tax. If we jump to our income statement tax, then there was already, we also made some changes for the STC in the wording here and in the mapping for that. And this wording was already here, so we didn't have to change anything on that. So that was the changes that we've made for tax. If we then go to the director's report, we've made two changes here. So the first one was that we've added the liquidity and solvency. So this is something that was in before, and we've just added it again. It's not a requirement, but it is something that's recommended. So something that you can use a very simple sentence, but if you feel it's relevant to your set of financials. What we've added under the going concern is we've added these two paragraphs. So the first one is, so we had always the company one, but we didn't have the group one. So now you have the figures pulling through for company group, and as soon as you have group on, it will switch on as well. So I've switched this on manually, but normally it will be switched off like that. So also something that you can look at. Then if you go to the release notes, there is some other improvements. I'm just quickly going to jump to that, which is very small changes that we've received from some of our clients from the market. On automation, it's really just some wording changes here and there, so some automation on the directors, which you can look at and see if that makes sense to you. Whether we had profit or loss, we changed it everywhere to be profit and loss. So really some wording changes that we've received from the market. Right, if I then jump back to the IFRS template. So for the IFRS template, we will have the cash flow worksheet and the cooperatives in, but that will not be in the beta, but it will be in the final release. Then we had our tax changes as well, which was exactly like I've showed you now. Then we have the rights of use asset improvement, which I will show you in a second. We have deleted the leasehold property. So why we've deleted it is because it was actually it was brought in a while ago because for requirements of Africa, where you have that 99-year lease situation. But what we've realized with the clients is that since IFRS 16 has come in, they have to use IFRS 16 really for that. So leasehold property that was used in Africa was not really relevant anymore. And the biggest concern was that if they then consolidate to a holding company in South Africa, then the disclosure would have been different and inconsistent between the two sets. So for that reason, we've deleted the leasehold property, the mapping, and everything relevant to that. Then the other area is construction contracts, which should have been deleted with IFRS 15 last year, but we have kept it in for another year, but we feel at this point we can delete it, and that's why that is also not in the set anymore. So let's quickly look at the IFRS set, just at the rights of use assets. So the disclosure that we had in for rights of use assets was as it was prescribed, but we had quite a significant amount of clients that asked us that they want the same disclosure as we had for the other assets notes to ensure that there was consistency. So what we've done is we've added both options, but you have the option to either show how it was before, and if you tailor your note, it will still look like that. But if you want to make it look the same as your PPE, your intangibles, and all the other assets note, then you also have that option. So what we've done first is we have the summary table here, which you can hide or open if you want. And then you also have your alternative content. So if I click on this button here, like the same for all our sections, you will have two options. So the layout that you currently see is the new layout, but if you open your file, the default will be the old one. And then there was two sections, the additions and some other disclosure that we have collapsed because of the recon. It is already included in the recon. So let's just wait a second for that to open. The alternative content is quite big, so we just have to get that in a moment. So right here you can see the difference. I see that's not showing on my screen. I'm just going to give it a second. So you have the net carrying amount, the default note, and then you have the reconciliation alternative. So like you can see at the bottom, this is normally how the note would look, which will give you your net carrying amount of your rights of use assets. And then you'll have your additions and you'll have your depreciation here at the bottom. So what we've done now is we say, well, because those two are part of your recon, you won't see that if you choose the reconciliation option here. The rest of the note is still exactly the same and will give you the additional disclosure that you still need, the other disclosure, held at free valued, and the rest. Then again, like I say, some general improvements. You're also welcome to look at the release notes to see what else we've done on the IFRS template. Again, the data retention on the IFRS template as well as the SME template is quite vital for us to test. So if you can have a look at that and give us feedback. I just quickly want to jump back to the cooperatives and just show you the file and where we've made the changes. So like I've mentioned, if you open the information store where you'll have your entity types, you can there select cooperatives, and then it will show. So you'll have a legal form of entity. It will change here to your Cooperatives Act, and you'll have your members. And I'm quickly going to open the financials, as you haven't opened it before I started, so just give that a second to load. So one of the areas while it's opening that I would just like to mention is we have in this file 2 areas where you can map your redeemable equity. And the reason for that is that we got feedback that sometimes that will be equity, so similar to share capital, and sometimes it will be a liability depending on the co-op agreement. And for that reason, we have shown it in both places. You have the option to map it in either of the 2. And but the disclosure are very similar to both of them. The recon looks the same. The one will obviously just be in your financial instruments, and the other one will not. So if I quickly jump to the balance sheet, you'll see loans to members. So the areas that I'm showing here is the areas that we have made changes on specifically for the co-ops. So here you'll see the loans to members we've put in as a loan. And like I said, the members' contribution you then have here and the relevant note, but you can also have it as a liability. You won't necessarily have it in both places. You'll normally have the one or the other. I'll just have it in both places for illustrative purposes. And the notes for these 2 are the same. And then you have some additional reserves. So if we jump to the statement of equity, you'll have your indivisible reserve, your members' reserves, and then your members' contribution that are new. And if we quickly have a look at the notes, we have our loan note, which is quite standard to our other notes. Then we have our members' contribution, which gives you the recon from opening and closing balance for both years. You have your members' reserves that will also give you a small recon, indivisible reserve with a small recon. Again, your redeemable members' contribution, which is now in your liability side. And then the last note that we'll have is the categories of financial statements, where these will also pull through. Then if I just, one last thing I want to show you, like I've mentioned, the lead sheets are updated for the probe documents, and you'll also see this change then on your balance sheet that the lead sheets numbers have updated here. Great, so if you can please, if you have any questions, you can put it in the question chat. And like I say, if there's any feedback, please provide that for us in the feedback form. And then I'm going to hand over to Christian. We're just going to take a 2-minute break just to hand over, and then he will take you through more in detail the probe documents and also the lead sheet changes that we've done. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you very much, Ninka. And from my side, welcome to everyone joining the Probe Audit section. And it is quite a momentous occasion for us today with all of the changes that we will be sharing. For those of you that don't know me yet, I'm Christian Stein and I'm the product manager for all of the assurance products at Caseware Africa. And release, we are dealing with probe, audit, review, and compilation. So probe audit fits into the assurance ecosystem at Caseware Africa. We sit next to financial reporting because we integrate together with the financials, as Nick has already mentioned before. And a lot of the changes that you see will relate to the two products and will also integrate with the two. We'll look in depth at the changes within Probe Audit. You'll see that we are still busy making some of the conforming amendments from the audit template into review and compilation. But for the purposes of beta, we will focus on audit. So in the agenda for today, first of all, we'll be looking at the ISO 315 revised 2019 changes and just an overview of what the implication of ISO 315 was for Probe. Then we'll go into what's new. We'll look at some of the features, fixes, content, and lastly deal with some of the known matters that we know about already. The team is still busy with some of the development, and we will then inform you of that so that when you look at the template, those don't come as a surprise to you. So for those of you that don't yet know about ISO 315 Revised 2019, back in September 2019, the new ISO 315 Revised was released. The changes is effective for audits for financial statements with a period beginning on or after 15 December 2021. So the year ends basically then 2022, 15 December or 30 December 2022. So we know a lot of you already have to do some of the interim audits, but as a principle, Probe has never really allowed for early adoption of standards. So the first release that ISO 315 is going to go out is in the November release. So the effects of the revisions is quite far-reaching, and it does require firms basically to revise their approach to risk assessment. And when I deal with Probe, you'll also see that in our methodology, we revise the approach to how do we assess risk and how do we respond. The revisions basically aim to drive a better quality and more consistent risk assessment approach, as well as okay, let me just see. I'm getting feedback that the audio is soft. Let's just see if we can make a change. Okay. Okay. So I have changed what I can on my side. I hope it's better now. And I'll also talk a bit louder just to make sure that we can make sure the audio is a bit better. Okay, so the revisions basically aim to drive better quality and a more consistent risk assessment, as well as promote the professional skepticism that we as auditors always have to have when we deal with risk assessment. We also need to look at understanding the nature and extent of the changes, as it is quite a significant task for those performing the audits. So for Probe specifically, and the main revisions that impacted us is first of all in obtaining an understanding. So in obtaining an understanding, you need to now understand the information system for significant clauses of transactions, account balances, and disclosures. So you will see a new abbreviation that we are using, Scott Tab B and then D, Scott Tab BD. And those are significant clauses of transactions, account balances, and disclosures. So it's a new term. that we're also using in Probe, as in some of the warnings, to inform you that this is a significant clause of transaction or an account balance or a disclosure, and you need to do. Then we also look at identifying and assessing the risk of into your misstatement. So first of all, there's inherent risk factors, and those inherent risk factors focus the auditor on the successability of assertions for misstatement. So we're really focusing on the inherent risk and the assertions. Then the standard also introduces a spectrum of inherent risk based on the likelihood and magnitude. Our probe always had likelihood and magnitude within the risk, but now we are automating some of those for you from likelihood and magnitude. And then we have a stand back provision. So after you have done the risk assessment, we need to stand back and we need to look at all the accounts. If we haven't recorded, for example, a material item, we haven't recorded a risk, let's stand back, make sure we are sure there is no risk for that specific area, which in turn means which assertions we need to actually go and audit. And then we're looking at responses to the assessed risk. For those responses, first of all, substantive procedures for each material clause of transaction, account balance, and disclosure is required, but there is no requirement to test all assertions related to a clause, a material clause of transaction, account balance, or disclosure. So this is one of the biggest changes that we are going to see within Probe. And I'll refer you back to this and you'll see it during the course of the webinar as well. So I want to make it clear, there is no longer a requirement to test all assertions for every material clause of transaction or account balance or disclosure. It is based on risk assessment. It is truly a risk assessment and a risk-based audit approach. You do need to, if it is material, look at least one assertion that would be relevant or that you select, but you don't have to look at all. This is one of the biggest efficiencies that we've seen in the audit standards from a probe perspective and in the probe audit methodology that we could have implemented. So we have done a significant amount of work to allow for that and to really allow a dynamic response to the risk assessment. So if we're looking overall universally what changes that we make and what those changes will impact. The following changes will impact the full Probe Audit Suite review and compilation, and then we'll look later in a bit more detail just to Probe. So first of all, Ninka alluded to it a bit before with the new Probe lead sheets, but there's now for all the clauses of transactions or account balances, there's a brand new document manager. There's new sections. We've renamed some of our old trusted favorites and we've renumbered them. And there's new lead sheets and new graphs. So let me open up the new document manager for you to get an idea of what. So you can see, actually, let me go down one level. We haven't made a lot of changes to planning and finalization in this regard. The biggest change is within the sections, the clauses of transactions, account balances, and disclosures. So we now have our lead sheets go from section 300 to section 900. If I open 300, you will now see that property, plant, and equipment is no longer 20, it is now 305. It's also a new section, 306, right of use assets. Investment property, we've got 310, but then it's also split into two different sections, the one on cost model and the one at fair value. Same for biological assets, and you will see that trend kind of continues. We've got our loans, our investments. In the past, a lot of these used to be one section, which caused us to do work not necessarily focused on the right account balances and classes of transactions. But now we are focusing that work on the specific sections. It has obviously an impact on whether a section is material or not, because they're now split. So something to be very aware of when you move forward is the materiality and how the sections are now split into different sections and into more sections. But also when it comes to risk assessment, when you're doing that risk assessment, to do the risk assessment for all the relevant sections. Okay, so that was one of the biggest changes that we've made. Each section will now also have a lead sheet as it had before. And if I open the property, plant, and equipment lead sheet as an example, we can see the lead sheet. If you don't have the graph, you can go view graphs. What's nice about the graph, you can also drill down into property, plant, and equipment, and I will then see my ratios as well as relationships between the different accounts. So because we could now really split out the sections and make sure that we get those relationships right between all the different accounts, you will see that graph in every single lead sheet where you switch it on, and you will also see the relationships. Okay, so there is a bit of a cheat sheet or an annexure A that we've built in the release notes that you can go and have a look at. It will be available on the cloud as well, that you can download. So just to familiarize yourself with the sections and also where the procedures for those specific sections comes from. So if you had certain procedures added to certain sections and now you want to go add them back, you can go and do that and use updated the look and feel of all the Probe documents. So all the Probe documents now have a brand new frieze, and we've done this based on feedback and information received. So let me go to document 1020, and you can now see that the header looks quite different. So to start from the left, we've updated the back button so that it's clear that it is a back button if you want to jump between documents. We've brought in the document number. In the past, it just had the name. Now you can also see the number. And then we also have our trusted version number. In the past, we had in red the large, audit, extend, SME. That information is now brought into the center to give you access to that and clear information on that. So you'll see we'll inform you which financial reporting framework you've selected, in this case SME, or you on audit or review, have you chosen large or small, and then are you on extend or core. Now I'll deal with extend and core a bit later because that's another new concept we've brought in for ISO 315. But this is our new header within all of the Probe documents. We've got the show button that used to be the view button. We've just clarified that this is show so that you don't get confused between the two view screens. Then there's also a roles, and we've brought in a new option for you to jump to the roles options directly. So if you want to change the roles on this specific document or in general for the Caseware file, you can do that. Setup state as is. We've brought in the history as well. We see that this is a feature that more and more people are using. And if you're not really look into at least using it, because you can save milestones at any point in time. And you can also look at the document's history after you've saved the milestone. So if you're reviewing a file, save the milestone before you or after you review, you can always come back and compare towards that milestone then. Refresh, that's where you refresh your risks and your client rows if you've inserted any. And then I've brought in a brand new go-to. The go-to allows you to open your calculator quickly, look at your adjusting entries, other adjusting, jump to the working trial balance, quickly go to your issues and highlight any issues within the document if there is. For Probe help, we've moved the help as well. The help used to be here, but we've moved it all the way to the right. So it's now also Probe help so that you're clear on which help do you need to go to. So if you need help on Probe, we've got our Getting Started series, the videos on the documents. Important to note, the videos are not yet updated. the videos will be updated later in the year, together with the final release when we release to market. So those videos are still the old videos, but beginning of next year, you'll have all of those videos available for your staff. We also have a chat with support. So if you run into an issue and you quickly want to chat with support, you can click on that. It will take you to the chat with support site, and you can have a chat with them. And if there's something bothering you on a document, or you're wondering if we have a hotfix or a fix for something available, you can go to the update from hotfix. It will take you to the hotfix page, and you'll be able to see what is available for you there. Okay, so that is the brand new look and feel on the actual freezers and the document headings. Then we also changed the recording dialog. So I'll show you what that looks like in a bit when we get to the risk. But you can now record risks and controls in one dialog that looks consistent, and it also has all the information available on one page. You don't have to jump next anymore. When you edit a risk, you will see the full risk. When you edit a control, you'll see the full control, and controls have been centralized on where that is recorded, but I'll show you how that works. For the consider, we used to have considers in blue. If you were small, if you were large, they always showed. And underneath some of the procedures, we show you consider, and then we give you some guidance on what to consider. For now, those will only show for extended, and I'll deal with extended a bit later. It will always now print for small. So in the past, it didn't show in print or print for small. Now it will print for small. And we've changed the color to green. So if we look as an example, there we can see our consider. For this specific procedure, there is my considerations that I need to consider. It is in green. It will be available for both large and small. It will only show for extended, because that's where we're extending the product to get guidance. And then you will also be able to see that when you print. So that's an area where we change. So if you're seeing these green considers, don't worry. We've brought them in so that we can give you a bit more guidance. In terms of fixes, we've documented all of the general fixes in paragraph 2.5 in the release note. You're welcome to go read on those to see if we fixed your items that you sent through to us. If we didn't, please get in touch if something's bothering you, and we can have a look at including that. Then look and some of the fixes to OT40, we've made quite a few changes there, including removing some of the duplications, as well as some improvements. And then we also looked at OT90, the report to management and dashboards with governance, where we incorporated some fixes. Okay, so now we're looking at audits specifically. So the previous items impacted universally, where now the next ones are only impacting the audit template. So first of all, we now have 6 assertions. So in the past, we had 4 assertions. Now we have 6. We start off with completeness, existence and occurrence, rights and obligations, and then accuracy, valuation, and allocation. We've brought in cutoff, and we've brought in presentation and disclosure. So it now gives us more focus when we're doing the risk assessment, so that when we're responding, we only need to respond to the actual assertions that's relevant. Those can be seen in the firm settings, and we also have the definitions documented in the firm settings. I mentioned core versus extended, or I mentioned the extended a bit. So let me give you a bit of background on what that actually means. So for core, we saw that ISA 315 actually took out the small versus large or big considerations in the standard and the documentation requirements. So for everyone on the call that maybe don't know, the small versus large, if you said in Probe that you're busy auditing a small client, the small would have just allowed you to document all of the items that was required underneath the documentation paragraphs, whereas large required you to document everything that was required, that didn't implicitly say you need to document. The new standard don't have that. So they talk about complex and less complex entities, and I think that's a trend we're going to see going forward. But we've come up with a concept to not optimize and not prompt for documentation based on the actual client itself, so not based on the size of the audit, but actually based on the person doing the work. So for core, we are giving you all of the ISO 315 requirements. So all the standard requirements that's there. If you choose extended, you will get the application material and other explanatory material that we feel is relevant to help you in that specific engagement. So our extended users or the extended option will see additional questions as well as considerations. So in document 1020, we've brought in a new question to say, do we elect to assist the engagement team with gathering and considering relevant information? So if you answer yes, you'll get the additional guidance. If you answer no, you won't. So if I go and I answer no, we can see the considerations. If we answer no, they are gone. And we don't have those considerations anymore, and documents will be smaller, more condensed, but you won't get that feedback or those prompts to guide you through the process, as well as the additional questions. So if we're talking now core versus extended, now you have an idea of the differences between core and extended. We'll expand on this as new standards come out, and as we make future improvements, we'll expand on this specific feature. So just an important one to note. Then for small versus large, we've removed, as I mentioned, the print for considerations for small clients. The considerations are now not linked to small versus large, but rather core versus extended. We've also removed of the detailed risk assessment. So for a small user, there's no impact on large, but for small, you used to answer small, and then we said, go into 1050, select the areas for detailed risk assessment, and only the areas that you selected for risk assessment would have then pulled through into 1160. Everything else was presumed as low, and then your work programs was amended accordingly. Now with a new requirement that says we actually don't have to look at all material items, we only look at relevant assertions or selected assertions. That is no longer required because the risk assessment between large and small is exactly the same. For large, you'll just record more risks and select more areas. For small, if it's not relevant, you won't record any risks for them, and your work programs will then be optimized in the same way. So we remove that complexity and that confusion. So going forward, there's no need for us to do that anymore, and all the risks and areas for risk assessment will be from 1051 and then on 1160. And then we've removed the reduced documentation requirements in the 11 whatever documents, because we don't need to, for small, document less anymore. The documentation paragraphs in 11 and in 315 is the same for small and large, because they don't have that concept. So all the 11 documents, 1120, 1130, 1125, or 1140, those have now been removed. So the document will be exactly the same whether you're in small or whether you're in large. But again, the core versus extended plays a role there, because if you switch on extended, you will see more. Okay, so let's look at document 1050 in a bit more detail. So first of all, when we reviewed all of our content, we tried to also optimize the content based on the new standard, based on when are we doing risk assessment and when are we responding. So we removed some of the inconsistencies in the product by making sure that the overall audit considerations are all on the same place. I've already mentioned the detailed risk assessment for small that we've added, that we've removed, and then, as I mentioned, to remove the overall audit considerations. So whether you want to use an expert, whether you want to use internal auditors, if you want to use a management expert, all of those overall audit considerations have been removed, and we have put them in document 1220. What we have, however, added is a question around walkthrough procedures. So if we go to 11 or 1050, let me just quickly have a see where that procedure is. We then prompt you to do the walkthrough procedures depending on the selection that you have made in document or in the firm settings. So in the firm settings, let's go and have a look. You now have the option of when do you want to do walkthrough procedures for different engagements. And if I just open the walkthrough, there we can see risk assessment procedures, walk through for each significant clause of transaction and account balance and disclosure to confirm an understanding of the process. In the firm settings, for those firm authors that's online, currently it is required for all audit engagements, so you won't get the prompt in 1050. But if you say, I want to elect per audit engagement, so I'm giving the users the option to choose, then there will be a procedure um, for you to do walkthrough procedures in document 1050. If you say yes, you want to do the walkthrough procedures, then we'll prompt you to do it. If you say no, then we won't prompt you to do it in 1150. Okay, so that's a change. It's an area of efficiencies that you can bring in if you want to rely on controls, and whether you, depending on your interpretation of the standard, whether it is required, not required, or do you want the different engagement teams to actually choose. While we are in the firm settings, I'll just point this out as well. We have switched on the assertions by default for all of the work programs. In the past, this used to be unticked, but because of the significance of assertions in the new methodology, so that people can see which assertions are actually relevant in the file. So those are the changes to document 1050. If we then look at document 1051, again, this is still in the gaining of information. We're not yet responding, so we've removed the selection of audit considerations. In 1051, types and volumes of transactions, you used to be able to select the audit considerations after you selected them in 1050. Now we've taken them out. We also removed the question around relevant controls and whether you want to look at controls for specific sections, and we've moved that into document 1150 so that it's more concise. What we've added, though, is the procedures deemed to be risk assessment procedures. So some of the procedures within work programs are considered risk assessment procedures, and we believe that those should rather be done in planning. Now, this is also quite a significant change for those of you that's familiar with the Probe methodology. So let's look at the new 1051 and how the changes have impacted. So first of all, we have our property, plant and equipment with our lead sheets, your account balance, and then there's a new section called transactions directly related to property, plant and equipment. I'll deal with this one a bit later after I've explained the concept, but there we deal with information or transactions relating to property, plant and equipment. Now, there's our brand new procedures to identify possible risk of consumer misstatement. So you'll see that some of those initial procedures from the work program we've moved. And the reason we moved it is because you need that information to help you with risk assessment. You need to make sure your accounts are correctly mapped and therefore correctly classified. If you don't, then you're not doing the risk assessment correctly. If there's any unusual accounts that's mapped to that specific area. To compare the balances per category, the underlying records for any unusual items, and then whether the accounting policies are appropriate and consistent. So those questions are now there for each section that you need to consider for that as part of planning, as part of the types and volumes of transactions. You would have done most of that work here already and analyzed the information. If you want to see the accounts mapped, you can also just click on the trial or on the lead sheet button. It will take you there to see if there's any unusual account, unusual differences within that specific item, and you can comment on that. So that is now brought into 1051. And then we have our normal property, plant, and equipment types and volumes of transactions. So there we have additions, disposals that we used to, subsequent measurements, and then again, transactions directly related to property, plant, and equipment, such as depreciation, revaluation adjustments, any impairment, profit and loss. Okay, so just take note of this for now, the transactions directly related, but when I get to the work program, I will explain those in a bit more detail. Okay, those were the changes to 1051. Now looking at document 1055, let me go and open that while I introduce it. Document 1055 is a brand new document called Understanding the Information Technology Environment, IT. So the objective of this document is to obtain an understanding of the complexity of the IT environment. And then for the extended users, we've also incorporated the additional content of Appendix 5 and 6 of ISO 315 with a lot more guidance. So if you're unfamiliar with the IT environment, then go and have a look at those appendices or switch on the extended procedures. So here we guide you through a process around the IT applications that's being used in the firm, the IT infrastructure, the process, and then we ask questions to help you do a risk assessment or at least understand what's going on in the IT environment. Because if it is a complex environment, we need to consider if we have the skills to actually go and do the risk assessment on the complex IT environment. So are accounting software developed in-house? If we say yes, then we can document the description. If we say no, more questions will come up. Do the client have access to the source code? If they do, explain what they can do, how they're making changes or they're customizing it. And then we'll come all the way to the end to say what is our assessment of the complexity of the IT environment. If it's none and no complex, then you can choose that. If it's large or complex, you can select that as well. And then we need to make a decision whether we need specialized skills to actually obtain an understanding and help us with risk assessment. So this is not to audit the IT environment. This is to help us get an understanding of how the IT environment is working. Up the using the work of an auditor's expert questions, and then you can go and document how you can incorporate the auditor's expert within the risk assessment process and understanding of the IT environment, as it has a huge impact on the other areas then within the audit. Okay, so that's a brand new document, so factor that one in when you're doing the budgets for next year. It's a new document that you need to complete to make sure that you actually understand the IT environment. Then looking at section 11. So 11 is our planning and risk assessment procedures, and we can see that we have made some changes to some of the documents and the document numbers as well. So first of all, document 1140 isn't gone. We've just renumbered it to 1125. So you now have 1120, 1125, and 1130. Inherent risk, fraud risk, control risk. So we've grouped the 1125 there in the middle just because we want 1130 together with the other documents around controls to be closer to each other, and it was confusing with that document there in the middle. So still similar information in those documents, but you'll see that it's positioned differently. Then document 1131 was removed. So we removed that, and you will now test those controls in the general sections work programs, and I'll show you that when I get there. We've also removed the small concept. So for small, you had different procedures than what you had for large because you only had to document the documentation paragraphs, but now that is removed. So you now have all of the, or all the procedures always shown. So looking at what we have added then for those 3 documents. So the documents will look a bit different than what they looked in the past. First of all, you need to individually assess the risk levels. Then we are automating that risk assessment. There will be an overall response. There will be automated responses. And then we have the ability to estimate assurance you gain from responses. So what does all of this mean? So let me take you through the document. So first of all, we start off with the type of risk assessment procedures that we perform. If you do inquiries, we ask you to document who did you do it with, the date and the designation, and then you start getting information about the entity and its environment. And you can document that in the description. So you will go ahead and document. We give you information and links back to some of the other areas that you might have documented already. Our 1055, the new document around the complexity of the environment. So we always had the ability to document this, but just not in as much detail. Then, if we look at those are documented there, other external factors, and then we get down to the financial reporting framework and accounting policies, allow you to document those. Again, we'll link you back to 1051, the selection of accounting policies. So that's why it's important that that risk assessment work is done in 1051 and not in the actual work programs, because then it's too late to do the risk assessment. And then we get to the identified risks section, where we would go and record. You go along at any point in time, as always, you can click on the record risk button. You can record the risk. I'm going to click on add new risk. I will double click to put in my source. I'll put in my risk description, the effect, as well as the risk of material misstatement. So for now, this is a change. You never used to be able to select the risk of material misstatement for each risk that you record, but now you actually have to. And I'm going to just stop there for now and submit this specific risk. So we've now done our risk assessment, we've recorded a risk, and there we can see the risk. If I then go down a bit, we have our conclusion question. So we ask, is it risk that you would have expected management to identify, but they failed to do so? If you answer yes, we prompt you with more questions. Do the risk assessment affect risk at assertion level? If you say yes, then you would go ahead and record the risk at assertion level. Now we get to the risk of material misstatement for inherent risk overall, and the inherent risk at the financial statement level is low. So how did we make this assumption? Well, we've looked at the risks that you've recorded, and we automated based on the highest risk that you have recorded. So you will, if you record 10 risks, 9 of them are low, 1 is on high, this will go then to high. Okay, so I started off with low, just to show you what a low risk assessment would look like. If I go and edit the risk, and I go medium or high, but I'll go high in this scenario, and I'll even say that it's significant. Now you can see that my risk dialog just expanded. So it's also your first new look at the new risk dialog that I mentioned earlier. So there's my new risk dialog, all of the information in one screen, and I can now go and select my overall audit response. So how am I going to respond overall to this risk, because it's high or medium? And I'm going to say we can use experts for this specific scenario, and I will then submit that risk. So now the risk has gone to high. The overall response is automated in my risk dialog. And if I see that the risk is as high, but if I go down a bit more, it also shows me my overall responses, and it shows me that I'm going to make use of experts. So what we've done is we are prompting you to then go to 1220 and then indicate for which class of transactions, account balances, and disclosures will you be using experts. You recorded this overall risk, and you can now go and rely on experts. But the reliance on experts are giving us assurance to a certain degree. It's not performing more procedures. In the past, when you recorded the inherent risk as high, immediately we assumed you will be performing more procedures in the work program, and therefore your samples were higher if you were going into samples, or you even had to do a bit more work. You had to do more procedures. Where now we've brought in this efficiency where you can say, okay, we don't necessarily have to do work. Well, we have to do work, but not more work. We can use experts. We can assign more experienced staff. We can change the nature and the timing of the procedures. And then we can go and we can say, how much assurance do we expect to obtain from these overall responses? So the fact that we have unpredictability or we are using experts, is this going to give us more assurance? So I'm hoping yes, because otherwise why use that I actually then make use of unpredictable experts. So if I then go and I say, yes, that's going to give me high assurance, now I have the option to reduce my remaining risk of medium misstatement, and I can go to medium. So immediately, my sample sizes will be smaller because I'm relying on more experienced staff, or I'm relying on predictability or on experts. So this is a huge efficiency that we've brought into not just inherent risk assessment, but also the fraud and control risk assessment. So the other two documents, 1125, the old 1140, and now 1125, 1130, will all have this if you answer that you have or if you record a medium or a high risk. So be very aware that this is available to you, but also during the product, we will then warn you to say, you answered that you would use an expert or use staff. Document how you are going to use an experienced staff. And when we get to the conclusion and finalization, then you need to respond to say, did that actually the experienced staff or the experts give you this high assurance? If not, then you might have to go back and do more work. So be very careful with how you then respond. Otherwise, you might have to change your audit plans. But this efficiency is there, and it allows you to work through the expected assurance and then lower your initial risk assessment so that when you're performing the work programs and you're doing your samples, those can be less. Okay, so that is the section 1120, 1125, 30 documents. If we then go into 1150, so we've renamed 1150 to Information System and Control Activities. So while we wait for that document, or while I explain to you, just want to open the document. So 1150, now the objective is to obtain an understanding of the entity's information system and communication relevant to the preparation of statements, and also be relevant to obtain an understanding of the control activities, as well as it facilitates the documentation of controls. Okay, so let's have a look at 1150. You'll see that it looks quite different. It has similarities to the other documents we just saw. So we do the risk assessment procedures, we indicate which ones, and then we have our procedures. Our financial reporting process, journals, and related parties, we always need to record controls for those, or not record controls, identify and evaluate, and then you need to go and document actually the information. So if you then plan to test the operational effectiveness of the controls, you can answer yes, and that will bring up the controls procedures. So I'm going to say we want to do controls for property, plant, and equipment, and we'll describe the process. We'll then describe the accounting records, and then do we plan to test the operating effectiveness? Yes, we do. If we then select that, we then have a record button, and that's where we record our controls. So if I click on the record control button, I now have the opportunity to record the actual control. So this is now your second view of the new recording dialog. And you can see it's all in one screen. So there I can go and record my control. I can indicate the sections or indicate more than one section if it's the same control addressing different sections. I can indicate those. Is the control designed? Yes. To address ROM? Yes. How did we explain how we determined it was implemented? Is the control implemented? Yes. Which assertions is it addressing? I'm going to select AVA. And do we intend reliance? Now, this is an important one because up until this point, your test of controls will not yet be switched on in 1220. So the question on how are we responding to controls, in the past, it used to be some from 1130, some from 1150, some from 1160 when you're recording a significant risk, and then some from 1220. We've now brought all of that into just this one document. So in 1150, all your significant risks, if they have controls, will be shown. And then your reliance intended, if you do record other controls, will also be in 1150. You whether reliance in it is intended for this specific control. If it is, you need to document the test of control. If you then document the test of control, you will then test that control. So then in document 1220, automatically test of controls will be switched on. You won't have a choice. If you don't want to test controls, you need to come back to document 1150 and switch off tests of controls. Okay, so that's document 1150. We also have our overall conclusion. And then how do we, whether the information communication support the preparation. If we then say it's not appropriate, we would also not be able to rely on controls because this is overall. If we say the whole information system is actually not appropriate and it doesn't support, then we will not be able to rely on those controls overall. And then we need to go to 1130 and maybe increase the risk. If we say it's appropriate, we can then continue and we can make use of the control environment, place reliance there, as well as test controls. Okay, so that was document 1150. It's been a lot already, but we're almost done with risk assessment and then we're moving into risk response. So for 1160, we have made a few changes there as well. And first of all, we now need to assess the inherent risk for the identified risks separately. We will then automate the risk assessment. And important, we have removed the risk assessment for fraud, the fraud risk assessment at assertion level. So for those of you familiar with the have one level less. So if you were familiar with the medium 1, 2, 3, 4, there's no longer a median 4. The whole methodology came down with one level, and that's because you can no longer record a fraud risk at assertion level for a specific item. Because fraud risks actually have to be incorporated when you recording the inherent risk. So if there's a fraud risk, inherent risk, you'll record it and you will then just make it higher for that specific area. Okay, so I'm going to make use of property, plant and equipment. First of all, what we see is the brand new assertions, our cutoff and presentation disclosure, where an assertion is not applicable. So for property, plant and equipment, cutoff is not applicable, that then the assertion won't show, it will show not applicable. And when you have not yet recorded a risk, it will show no IR, which means no inherent risk. So we also indicate that there's no risk for a section. So why do we do that for every single assertion? Remember, I mentioned back in the beginning, ISO 315 changes. You don't have to perform procedures on an assertion that has no risk. So completeness has no inherent risk. We actually don't have to respond to that assertion when we're testing the work program. So let's have a look at the work program. So the work program will actually not have any procedures. We have our risk assessment and we have our conclusion. There's no procedures for me to respond to because all of the assertions and inherent risks are no inherent risk. Let's go back to 1160 and record a risk. So I'm going to record a new risk for 1160 for property, plant and equipment. I'll say this comes from 1160. What is my description? I'm not going to bother too much about those. We select the sections. You can select multiple sections if the same risk is on all of the sections. You can then also do the inherent risk factors. So the new standard has inherent risk factors to focus us. So let's say this is a complexity risk or a risk around complexity. What is the implication for that specific item? And I'm going to select the AVA assertion. If you're not familiar with the assertion name, then you can also just hover above the abbreviation and you can see accuracy, valuation, and allocation. So what is the likelihood to occur? We always had likelihood in the old product, and but now what you will see is we populate the inherent risk for you. So similar to what we've done in 1120, we will summarize all of the risks, and the highest one, that is your inherent risk for the section. So you no longer have to go per assertion and assess the risk. As you're recording the risks, we will automate that risk assessment for you. Then, because it's a high risk, we also say consider whether the risk is a significant risk. If it is, you can select that, and then we can also document the specific audit procedure. And you've also now again seen the new risk or record dialog. So this is the dialog. You can scroll up and down, make changes as you like, and then submit. We no longer have the back and the next buttons. We still have the submit buttons, but that just helps us within the consistency and also make it a bit easier to have one view of a risk without you having to go back and forth between the different risks. Okay, so there we have the risk generated in the risk report. We have our description, our inherent risk factors, the implication, AVA assertion, likely monetary impact, and inherent risk is then high. The inherent risk is high only for AVA, and there we can see that the AVA assertion now is high. The others, no risk. So keep this in mind because I'm going to go into the responses and then back to the work program. But it's important because this is one of the biggest changes in the methodology as well, because in the past we tested for all material items, all assertions. Now we only test where there is risk. So only AVA procedures. But let's not jump ahead. Let's go into 1220 and look at the changes into 1220. So the audit plan and strategy, we've now done the risk assessment. I'm sure you can see, and for those of you that haven't yet made the connection, risk assessment is more important than ever before. If you're not doing the risk assessment, and we've been preaching and communicating around the importance of planning, but now really, if you're not doing planning and you haven't done the risk assessment, you're going to send out your audit teams and they will have no procedures in the audit work programs. You need to make sure you select the relevant assertions and you record the risks at the right level for those relevant assertions. If you're not going to do that, the work programs are going to be empty and no work is going to be done. So that is a major efficiency gain that we're gaining because we can really focus the work on audits, but it's also a risk. So just be aware of that. If we're looking at 1220, our audit considerations, we've now moved the overall audit considerations together with the ones in the sections from 1050 to 1051 into document 1220. 1220 now also includes the inherent risk at assertion level for each of the assertions, as well as the options to select assertions for testing, together with the stand back procedure. So let's go into document 1220 and have a look. So we'll have our inherent risks, the fraud risks, as well as the other risks. I just want to go and refresh my risk tables. So remember, we don't refresh these risk tables every single time when the document's open. You actually have to click on it when you go and record a risk, or when you open it for the first time, it will be generated. Okay, so there I've generated my risk. We can now see that the inherent risk was high, my expected assurance is high, my remaining is low. Then we've got fraud risks, there's no, and then control risks, there's no. Are we planning to use evidence prepared by a management expert? And this is one of the warnings I spoke about, or the considerations. So we already indicated that for overall responses, we want to use experts there. But if we're not going to say yes here and document where, then there's going to be an inconsistency in the file. So these are the overall audit considerations, and we need to make sure we link them. So we give you warnings. We don't just always want to make that assumption. So we give you the warnings. You still need to use your professional judgment where you want to use those experts and how you want to use them. So we're not automating this, but we are bringing them in and guiding you through the process in terms of the considerations. So after I indicate yes, evidence prepared by a management expert, if I then open property, plant and equipment, there on the left-hand side, we now have the use of management expert, and we can say, yes, we want to use management experts for property, plant and equipment. Now, we've also changed the 1220 document quite a bit. So first of all, your inherent risk or your risk of procurement statement will pull through. Then your inherent risk at assertion level, there we have no inherent risk, high, no inherent risk. So there we need to respond. If you come to this point and you say, actually, I also want to do rights and obligations procedures, you can. We'll also get a warning when a section is material, but everything is no inherent risk, and you then have to select an assertion for testing, and we'll warn you accordingly. Then we have our significant risk, so that you can see how do we respond, and then we have our audit considerations. So there's all the audit considerations. We've made them open and made them visible for you as well, to say in the past these were all hidden and it was a bit of a black box. People didn't understand why some of my procedures not showing. Now you can see, okay, use of an auditor's expert, we said no, or we haven't indicated that we want to use an auditor's expert, and therefore all of these sections can't have it. If I go and I say, yes, I want to use an auditor's expert, now I'm actually allowed to select it, and for the areas where it's selected, you will then see that. All of the others will then no, because I haven't indicated that I want to do them. Then we have our significant risk responses. Remember, I recorded a significant risk for property, plant and equipment. Test of controls, I indicated or reliance on a control. And then for required procedures, there's a high risk, or if you select one of the assertions, required will be selected. If I go to, let's go to investment at fair value, there's also a risk. Let's go to one of the others. If there's no inherent risk, you would not be required to do any of the areas. Here you can see, we also show you that it is a material section. So there's the warning, and because it is material, you then have to select at least one assertion. So we can say we want to do 4 other financial assets, we want to do the AVA assertion, that warning will go away and required procedures will be enabled. Okay, so let's go then back into the presentation. We've looked at all of the changes into 1220, and now we're going into the work programs. So we're done with risk assessment, we're done with the response. Some of the changes in 1230 and 1210, they are, we've updated those procedures with the new standard requirements, and those are just procedural changes. It didn't have an effect on the methodology, so I'm not showing them to you, but you can read about them in the What's New. So for work programs, and I really can't stress this enough, only procedures with relevant or selected assertions will show. So again, I've mentioned it. If we now go into the work program, you saw me select the AVA assertions. If I go into the work program now, only those AVA assertion procedures will show for property, plant, and equipment. So before, we didn't select any assertions. Now we did select an assertion, and we can see the AVA procedures. Okay, so efficiency together with risk. Then, talking around those transactions relating to account balance. You saw some of it in 1051. And now let me explain what we have done there. So we split out the sections to be more concise and to also have a one-to-one relationship with the financial statements. So if there's a line item in the balance sheet or statement of financial position, then there will be a section within the document manager. Those sections will relate, the numbers will agree, and then we split out the transactions to the relevant sections. So what do I mean by that? In the past, property, plant and equipment, the balance for property, plant and equipment in Probe used to be made up of the actual property, plant and equipment balance, any profit and loss on the sale of assets or property, plant and equipment, depreciation and impairments. Those were all part of Section 20. And those made up the balance. Those made up whether PPE is material or not. We split those out so that we can make sure that the accounts actually agree with the financials. It will be much easier to reconcile those lead sheets. It's a one-to-one relationship, but that meant that the procedures that actually had to happen for those items also had to move, because now you're testing depreciation, and the balance for depreciation is not in property, plant and equipment, but it is in cost of sales and operating expenses. So the actual balance for depreciation is now in 720 and 750, cost of sales, operating expenses. We also have operating gains and losses, that is in 741, so that you make a profit on a sale or a loss on a sale. And then we have borrowing costs, which you want to capitalize or not, and that is as part of Section 775, finance cost. But what we recognized was that we can't really move those procedures out of the work program, because when you look at a section, when the person audits property, plant and equipment, you want to audit depreciation, you want to audit the loss. It didn't make sense for us to now have you go into operating expenses and go and audit that there. So what we've done is we've brought in the concept of transactions relating to account balance. So those are the it's important, it's not additions and disposals where it's bank and PPE, but it is income statement or other areas together with the balance, which is a transaction relating to account balance. So if we take, for example, property, plant and equipment now as an example, you have depreciation, and depreciation can go one of two ways. It can either go cost of sales or it can go operating expenses. So we will now prompt you to first of all look at the cost of the property, plant and equipment and do that whole transaction. And then there will also be procedures to test the transaction relating to that account balance in property, plant and equipment. So let's have a look. So the section is broken down in, or a work program is now broken down into two. main areas of procedures. You have your account balance, that is property, plant, and equipment audit procedures. So there's the procedures that we used to, that we would do for the account balance. So agree the amounts and disclosures for all procedures that require, those are just a generic one, review the list of property, plant, and equipment, and do the following, select material additions, do the following. But then if I scroll down, we also now have transactions directly related to property, plant, and equipment audit procedures. So I've also gone and I said for AVA, there's a gain and a loss, and I want to test that specific assertion. So the property, plant, and equipment work program will contain the procedures. The account balance procedures with the selected and relevant assertions from 12 or 1160 and 1220, as well as the procedures directly related to property, plant, and equipment as well, and the risk assessment I've done there. But you will conclude on these procedures in their respective sections. So these are just guiding you to audit the procedures together with property, plant, and equipment, but these procedures are actually relating to gains and losses. So those will be concluded on in the gains and loss section. When we then conclude, we conclude on the account balance only, and you would then be able to see or go through the work program in that way. When we get to the income statement items, there will not be, the only one that has a transaction related is the employee costs and other expenses, because employee costs are very specific, but they will not have transactions relating to, because they are transactions relating to the statement of financial position and other areas. If you want to have a look in the release notes, I've given you as part of 3.6.3.6, there's a workflow, a detailed workflow for you to go through on how procedures will land up in my specific work program. So first you start with 1050 and you answer some questions there. Then you go into 1051 and there's your transaction types together with your transactions relating to account balance, the TRABs. Then you go into 1150 around controls, 1160 record your risks, 1220 select the assertions, and then on the work program only will you see the procedures. Okay, so those are the TRAB concept. What we have done is we have made sure that for beta, we identify a few work programs for you to have a look at. And the documents that we have indicated on here are the work programs that's actually done and ready for you to go and beta test. Remember, we now have to move all of those procedures from the previous sections into the new sections together with linking them up with the different TRABs, the different audit considerations, and the team is hard at work to make those changes for you. What we've done is we've identified these ones. They have, so 305 as an example, have two TRABs already, 341 and 350. It's a nice example to go and test. And some of the other sections also have TRABs into operating expenses. So you can have a look at those. For the other work programs, those work programs are not yet complete. We are still building in their TRABs. So the account, a lot of the account balance areas will work, the assertions will work, but we are still building in those TRABs to make sure that the TRABs show and work as intended. So you would have to be very careful if you want to use the template. Remember, the template is still in a beta state, so we can't yet guarantee that all of the procedures in the other work programs will show, because we're still busy with splitting out those TRABs and making sure those sections actually work. And then if we get to finalization, we've basically updated the finalization. Some of the documents are not yet 100% complete, but we are updating those with the new sections. otherwise adding some of the procedures with regards to ISO 315, but not significant other changes to those areas. Okay, so looking at some of the known issues. So first of all, we have not yet worked on compilation and we haven't finalized review. So if you're doing looking at the beta template, you don't need to look at compilation. Compilation will still be the all documents. The team will only start with that in the coming weeks. Same with review. For those using idea integration, we will first be finishing up the procedures before we add the idea integration back in. So you might see some idea integration procedures already, but those will not work. Those will only work in the final release. And then, as I mentioned already, the work programs not mentioned are not yet finalized, and those will only be finalized in the final release. Now, you've heard Ninka mentioned the update before, and we've made a significant change to the template. As you can see, the work programs, the sections, and all the different areas has been changed. There will not be much data retention on the probe side. For financials, you've heard Ninka mention there will be data retention. Financials will still continue to have the data retention as we know. For Probe, there will be very limited data retention. Most of the documents have been changed, the documents have been renumbered, split into different sections. The risks have been split into different sections, so there will not be data retention on those. If you inserted procedures into your work programs, you will not retain any of that. You will have to go and insert them again. Again, the reason for that is because we split the sections, and we have areas, for example, section 25 now is 4 or 5 new sections, and it would have been wrong for us to go and try to split or put those procedures into those work programs. The same thing with risks. We don't want to end up with risks being recorded for the wrong sections. And even if we think about the risk itself, it now has different selections that you actually have to go and record. So even for beta you will not have data retention, but just remember that for next year as well, when you do an update, there will be limited data retention on some of the areas. I almost want to say no data retention, but where we can, we try to keep as much as we could. So your 1020, your 1050 documents, some of the other documents will still try and keep as much information as we can from the previous releases. Then in next year's release, we'll have data retention again. Now, what we are finding though for the beta release is after update, you might find that for the probe documents, especially work programs, because of the new inclusion of the tabs and the lead sheets with the new sections, that they have a very slow opening speed. If that happens to you, we are aware of that already. It doesn't always happen. It happens on some machines. If that does happen, and you want to have a look at that document, then just create a new file for beta and work with that specific document in the document manager then for that file. You can run an update if you then find it slow. Then working with the actual probe documents, then know it relates to this issue. We are busy fixing that and sorting that out. With how do we optimize the different tabs? You can imagine that the work programs now have to read from many different sections, and we need to, on update, sort that out for you. But if you're finding that the work programs are slow when you're opening it, or when you're working in it and it recalculates and it's slow, then just create a new file in that instance if you want to have a play around with Probe in those scenarios. We will, however, fix that, so don't worry, you will have an update, and the update will work for the final release. Okay, so Ninka mentioned a bit of the timeline, but just as a reminder, the timeline for today, we had the beta webinar now. The beta testing will start on Monday. Well, you can already download the templates, you can start already. The beta testing will end on the 13th of October. That's the last day for feedback. And then we will incorporate some of the feedback after that date. We will then release on the 16th of November, and we'll have the What's New session on the 18th of November. The beta process, Ninka went through the beta process. I won't spend too much time on that. Just as a remember, the templates will be available. I saw a few questions coming in on the templates as well. It's already available. It's on the support cloud. And for those of you who don't yet have access, we'll give you access by close of business today. If by Monday you don't yet have access, please reach out and we can have a look at why. Then some of you might have already received the Assurance Roadshow invitation. I'm sure, as you can imagine, you can see the number of changes that we've made in Probe. So we thought it good to have a roadshow and upskill our users and inform them around the changes within Probe. So we're doing our regional roadshows again. It is complimentary. You don't have to pay for the sections. We would want as many of you to come and join us. We're starting on the 31st of October in Cape Town, ending on the 18th of November in Johannesburg. There will be 2 events for Johannesburg. The one will be a physical event, so you're welcome to come through to our offices if you book, but there's also a virtual session, so if you couldn't attend one of the others, you can attend the virtual sessions. So please make sure that it is free training for you and your staff. You can send as many people as you want. There will be space available, and we will make sure that we upskill everyone and show them the changes that we've made to not just the Probe documents, but also the Probe audit methodology, and inform them why, because of and how ISO 315 is having an impact on audits overall. So for the sessions, it's also an opportunity for us to meet in person. I'll be at all of the events. So if you also just want to touch base with me, if you have any other questions or concerns or feature requests at that point, we can have a discussion then for next year. Okay, so that was quite a lot of changes. I want to say it is the biggest release since we released 2010, and we had the conforming amendments to the ISO standards at that point. We then did the methodology, and this is the biggest change we've made to the methodology since. So it's a big change for us, I'm sure, and I can understand it's a big change for you, but it's already good that you are in the beta sessions, you are getting an early preview of what's going on, and we can already start working together to see how we can all look together incorporating the ISO 315 changes. So let me have a look at some of the questions. Let me just open the questions pane, and then I'll start answering some of, if there are any questions. See this change. Are there any changes for Probe Review? There is no changes for Probe Review at this stage except for the sections. So the sections that's changing, you'll now have the those universal changes, the sections, the new look and feel, the new risk dialogue, or the likely to be misstated dialogue. Those will be the changes for review. But we didn't make anything or any changes to the review methodology or the review product specifically in this round. Where do you get details of the roadshows? So the roadshows, you can go and make a booking on our community, success.casewareafrica.com. Let me quickly navigate to that page. So success.casewareafrica.com. If you don't have the link to the email, you can navigate here, click on Customer Success Services, and within Customer Success Services, there's upcoming section or sessions. You can navigate through. So let's go. There we can see the Cape Town session, Bloemfontein, Bethlehem. When you click, you can then go and book for that specific section. So we're trying to accommodate all the regions. If you haven't received the invite, please go into success.casewareafrica.com, Client Success Services, and book the session. As I mentioned, there is no cost for that section. all sessions. Okay, it seems like there is no other questions. As always, the recording will be sent out for everyone who attended the session early next week, and we'll also upload a recording to the community if you want to send that on to other people within the firm. As a reminder, if you don't yet have access to cloud, we'll give you access to cloud during the course of today, and the template is already available there. So you can go and beta test. That the beta form is available there as well, and the last day for feedback is on the 13th. And then I'm hoping to see you all at the user groups. If not, I will then see you on the 18th at the What's New session. So from me and Ninka, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you have a great Friday further.